Josh Brown, let's talk about the state of EA slash single player slash multiplayer stuff and the fact that EA are on a bit of a run right now in regards to single player things. One of the news stories doing the rounds that a Black Panther game, which we kind of knew was the case anyway, we knew that thing had been leaked, but this has now finally been officially mentioned by EA's new studio, Cliffhanger Games, headed up by Kevin Stevens, who worked on God of War, Halo Infinite, Shadow of Mordor, and Shadow of War, and a whole bunch of Call of Duties, dedicating yet again to a single player framework. Now, it's hilarious at this point because EA, almost 10 years to the day, were proclaiming single-player games dead.
Amazing, isn't it?
Amazing. And now they are, front and center, one of the biggest teams dedicating the most money to single-player projects, whether it be the Dead Space remake, whether it be the Jedi trilogy now. Assuming it'll be a trilogy. We've got more to say about that later on in the podcast. But yeah, EA is front and center. Single-player was always valid, and they finally realized it again.
I would rather them hold up their hands and say, look, we got it wrong. We're going to actually double down on single-player games, rather than say, no, we're right, and plug on with live service games no one's buying, right? I think they learned this the hard way via Star Wars, because obviously they went all in on Star Wars after 2013, and they put a bunch of games into production. They went all in on their live service approach with Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2. They ended up canceling Amy Hennig's single-player Star Wars game, and like you said, around that time they were saying, no one wants survival horror games. Single-player games are dead. And then a little title called Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Fallen Order was the first one.
That was the first one. That one came out and sold gangbusters, sold like 12 million copies, and they said, whoa, we can make money here. Hold your horses. It turns out they're not dead. Let's whack a load of these into production.
Yeah, people actually do want video games they can finish, funnily enough. We mentioned this as well because we did just do a video on, underrated or overlooked single-player campaigns on the channel, which is doing gangbusters. Go check that thing out. Lots of criminally overlooked single-player campaigns. I think there's a substantial amount of people crying out for single-player stuff in the land of the live service. I feel like especially Sony committing to so many live service games like Fair Games, like Foam Stars. It's one of those things where I was like, who's asking for this? Who was asking for this thing? It's always this constant attempt to do a Fortnite, to do an Overwatch, to do something that is in the vein of an established thing, and it's just so nakedly copycatting that thing.
Yeah.
When I feel like so many of us became gamers or would consider ourselves gamers or love the medium of gaming because of single player stuff.
Look, that is true, and I agree. I love single-player games above all else. I'm not going to say all live service games are bad. There are loads that I love. I think you can make a live service game with passion, with energy, with innovation at the heart of it that lands, that is just as good as any single-player game. But the issue is what you were mentioning there. So many of them are trend-chasing. So many of them just feel like a game you've played a million times and are bare bones versions of that same game at that, and they come out broken, they come out buggy, they come out with a roadmap that never happens. Looking at you, Anthem 2.0. And that's, to me, the core issue with those titles. And I do think that, the likes of Sony, which obviously, I'm not sure if you know, but I like Sony games. I like some of the stuff they've made.
Fanboy. Horrible.
They feel like 5 years behind the curve because it's like, why are you getting in on this now when we have kind of en masse rejected live service games that look like this, and we're re-embracing single-player games? Like, to me, the lesson that you learn after Star Wars Fallen Order or after Elden Ring, the lesson isn't, maybe we should make more live service games. It's, no, look how much people love these dense, high-quality single-player experiences, and look how much they sell. Elden Ring is a new IP. Yes, it's from a beloved studio with a lot of identifiable game mechanics, but it's a new IP. It's single-player focused. It made the most money ever, and like that to me is the lesson that even EA is starting to learn from.
So there's a couple of things I want to mention here. We'll talk about live service stuff just in general. One, in regards to EA, is just how well their EA Originals program has done. Funding Joseph Fares's work. It Takes Two, obviously a co-op game, but still fundamentally not a live service, fundamentally something designed to be finished. Unravel was another one that came from the EA Originals program, which in its sequel again went co-op, but it's still very much designed to be finished and very much not trying to be a overly predatory monetization-driven thing. Just video games. Just games that are designed to be finished, that aren't designed to have dailies, weeklies, monthlies, etc. That's all I want to see, and it seems like that's also what Keith Stevens Shaking Keith Stevens. Kevin Stevens over on EA's new studio Cliffhanger Games when he's detailing the Black Panther game. I'm going to read out the quote that comes with the press release here because this might be ridiculous, but at least it's down the right lane that we want. Stevens saying that we're dedicated to delivering fans a definitive and authentic Black Panther experience, giving them more agency and control over their narrative than they've ever experienced in a story-driven game. The studio want to build an expansive and reactive world that empowers players to experience what it's like to take on the mantle of Wakanda's protector, the Black Panther. More agency than you've ever experienced, Josh Brown.
Here's the thing with this quote, right? Do I believe it's going to be the most agency I've ever had in a game? Is it going to be the most story-driven game ever made? I don't think so.
Ken Levine's having kittens in the club.
I like that that's what they're aiming for, though.
Yes.
I like that that is the goal that they have set out to achieve. Like, that is miles better than trying to come out the gate and say, well, we're trying to make a story game, but we're also trying to make a multiplayer game, and you won't believe just how well the story works in the multiplayer matches. Like, no. This, at least, is ambitious. Yes, it does kind of sound like marketing guff in a way. It kind of reminds me of when Microsoft came out and they started saying, look, Project Dark is in the works. It's going to be the first quadruple A game.
Perfect Dark.
Oh, Perfect Dark, sorry. It's going to be the first
still in the project stage,
quadruple A game. Yes, and then we saw what happened with that. It's still in the project stage. It's apparently a mess internally. High ambitions don't always mean high quality results, but I just it makes me excited, man. I don't buy into it 100%, but it makes me excited.
I feel like Star Wars as well, like Fallen Order sold really, really well. Jedi Survivor, I still think it's still getting patched. It's still receiving a whole bunch of patches, but that is, you think about the most optimum version of that game. And if you play it on quality mode, you're totally fine. It's the performance mode that tanks the whole thing. But that is one of the most recommendable games of the year, if not one of the top 3 games of the year so far. It certainly is one of yours. And there's a lot of different things to recommend about that. But it does sort of speak to a changing of the guard within EA. I feel like they tried so much to just, monetize in regards to the FIFA Ultimate Team packs and everything else.
Yeah.
And this year, I think it's later this year, it might be next year, we have the, EA's Football Club. It's going to be their sort of next continuation because the FIFA license is going its own way. But you want to hope that the last 10 years of EA just trying to milk everything dry is dying or dead. And hopefully you can point to the likes of Black Panther and Star Wars and the EA original stuff as, where they should have been all along.
I think it has to be. I think EA will always have some kind of multiplayer / live service experience, but I just think they made too many mistakes. Like you said, some of the titles you mentioned there that I mentioned earlier, Star Wars Battlefront, previously Battlefield 2042.
Yeah.
Like all of these high-profile live service games, Anthem and Anthem 2.0, they keep coming to mind, arrived and died. And it did the company no favors. It made them no money. It gave them, a critical kicking. It put them in a bad stead with fans. And now, we have this, plethora of single-player games from them, including the Dead Space remake, which came out at the start of the year as well. And it does seem like that's the future. If we look at interviews with other studios that they have, including BioWare, it kind of seems that while the likes of Dragon Age 4 and Mass Effect 4 might have started out with kind of live service ambitions in mind, they have course corrected, at least in the state of Dragon Age, which you read into that project, and apparently it still has some of those live service elements, but they're trying to get away from it. They're trying to make the right moves to kind of return to why people love that franchise to begin with, why people love these developers to begin with. The proof, of course, will be in the pudding. They might mess up a Black Panther game. They might not do it justice. It might be bad, but I just hope not, because I think for as much crap as EA gets, rightfully, it gets a lot of, hate because it's made a lot of bad decisions over the past 10 years and then some. It's got so many talented developers, so many talented studios, and I just want them to kind of feel unshackled, not have to bend to these corporate whims of monetization and predatory live services, and just be able to make something they want to make. And if it comes across as corny in the interviews, so be it.
At least it's like I said before, it's in the right direction. I feel like a lot of the hate that EA got across the last 10 years is because they were so great across the 2000s. It was only at the very end of the 2000s when the UEFA Champions League games started getting the card packs and the microtransactions and whatever. That's where it all started back in the day. But before then, at least what we grew up with, with was an EA that was associated with like the Simpsons game, the Lord of the Rings games, the James Bond games, and especially, you know, Everything or Nothing was like their attempt at taking a film-sized budget and doing a video game that could be a main installment in a franchise. And they did the same thing with the Simpsons game as well. And like all of that back then, EA's name was a lot more highly regarded. Like it was the whole "it's in the game" thing was like, you know, a bit of a slogan and whatever. But they set a bar, and they fell down over and over again across the 2010s because they just couldn't hit that bar anymore. Not that they wanted to, they just wanted to monetize. But now that that approach has completely failed, you kind of hope that somewhere in there, across the thousands of people employed there, just sort of says, remember when we used to make video games? And then finally now the shareholders can go, do you want to make some video games? Maybe we actually do that again.
Hey, that made us a lot of money. You know, maybe we should do a little... Have you got any more of those? Got any more Jedi games?
Star Wars did pretty well.
Hey, Star Wars is a big brand. What about Marvel? That's in. The kids like Marvel.
Why not more?
I don't want to cut them too much slack because, I mean, they are making a lot of right decisions, but they do keep cancelling Titanfall 3, which is not a great idea. EA, please make that.
Very true.
But yeah, I think across the board, just as an industry, I don't know where your head is from this, because I know we talked a lot about I know we talked a lot about sequels and remakes and safe bets. And we are definitely in an era of safe bets, I think.
Oh God, are we?
But we're also in an era of single-player games. Those safe bets manifest in the likes of Resident Evil 4 Remake. They manifest in the likes of Starfield and God of War Ragnarok and all of, you know, really good games like that. And to me, I love it. It means I get games like Final Fantasy 16. It means I get games like God of War, like I mentioned. It means I get Spider-Man 2, Starfield. I'm eating well this year, Scott Tilford. It might not be meals that, you know, I haven't had before, but I'm enjoying them all the same.
Yeah, and they're very hearty meals once you get stuck into them as well. It's not like this year's games don't have a lot to offer if you just want to spend some money and have a good time. I think that there is a whole conversation media-wide about how much the likes of Hollywood are just banking on nostalgia, etc. But yeah, when it comes to EA, hopefully more positive futures than we've had for the last few years.